Welcome to the final part of our heritage talk. Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. Exploring the archaeology of the American Civil War without leaving Britain. The final part discusses the Lelia and Liverpool.
So why was the Lelia intended only to be used on the other side of the Atlantic in support of a cause that believed in the enslavement of people built in Liverpool? Well, I think I have to say there are two things. First of all, it was the lure of money. If you owned a blockade runner, such as this, which is seen in a rather glamorous depiction from a contemporary newspaper, you could make the money you spent on building the ship back in 2 or 3 trips. Such was the premium placed on the cargo of war materials and luxuries that you would have carried. And therefore you can imagine that because it was the profits were so great, that you would find that if you were a shipbuilder, you could charge premium prices. And in fact, the prices you could charge were more or less irresistible for many of the shipbuilders of the Clyde and of the Mersey. And millers certainly couldn't resist that. In fact, and indeed, the other reason why the businessmen, shipbuilders and sailors in Liverpool were prepared to work on these blockade runners and support the Confederate cause was because of the pre-existing connections between Liverpool and the southern states. The cotton trade had been going on a long time, and of course before that there had been the slave trade, even though it was banned. It was banned in the early 19th century. There was considerable hand-wringing in Liverpool about the loss of income that it would pose. They soon found cotton was an adequate substitute, but then when that was disrupted by the war, there was a great deal of sympathy within Liverpool, or at least within certain parts of the population, for the Confederate cause. And indeed, they say that more Confederate flags flew in Liverpool during the war than flew in the Confederate capital. Sailors, of course, were often quite keen to sign up for blockade runners because they would be paid very handsome wages, particularly the captains, who would get a premium for getting through the blockade. And they were paid a premium because it was risky, although I've said that at the start of the war, blockade running was quite easy. It was easy to penetrate the blockade. The Union got better, and as they captured blockade runners, they turned them against the vessels that were trying to get through. So it was double trouble for the captains of blockade runners. And by the end of the war, by 1865, when Lelia was brought into commission, as many as 1 in 2 of those blockade runners were not getting through. They're either being sunk or captured, which in a way only added to the allure and bumped up the prices and the premiums and bumped up the glamour in the eyes of many people over on this side. And this was a sort of clandestine glamour as well, because millers couldn't openly build the Lelia. None of the blockade runners could have built them to carry war supplies openly, because that would have breached British neutrality. Now, that didn't stop the shipbuilders of Britain trying their best to build ships for the Confederacy, partly out of sympathy, but partly because they were making such huge profits on them. And of course, as well, the British shipbuilders, who were the greatest steam shipbuilders in the world at that point, and the go-to place for fast steamships. They also built commerce raiders for the Confederacy. The British government, in a sort of little bit of a half-hearted way, tried to stop them, but so long as they weren't too obvious, they tolerated it. Now, the Union didn't tolerate it, and the Confederate agents who came to Liverpool at the start of the war were followed by swarms of Union secret agents who operated through the Union consul in Liverpool, and they spied on ships such as the Lelia. So, as well as being able to read newspaper reports of the ship as it was being built, as it was doing its sea trials, and when it left, we can also read the accounts of Union agents who were observing it. I think they tried to stop the Lelia leaving, but the inspection, the port inspection of the cargo, didn't throw up anything amiss, so the Lelia was allowed to leave. How careful that port inspection was, whether the inspector was more inclined to support a Liverpool ship than the Union, it is a moot point. We simply don't know. But this support given by financiers, given by sailors, given by shipbuilders is now, it was controversial even then, but now is even more controversial. And this is my own little contribution, my own little artistic response to that, reflecting on what blockade running meant. This is a blockade runner such as the Lelia. It is cutting a swath of gold through the sea on its way. But at the same time, it is the sea is symbolic for the passage of time and the fact that slavery had its day. You'll see that symbolized in the slave images taken from the famous Liverpool slave ship plans, which you can see in the sea. So time and tide were eventually against the cause that the blockade runners stood for, and that's symbolized in this picture. Liverpool is still coming to terms with its legacy as probably the greatest. Well, the greatest is a funny word, isn't it? But the most famous or infamous slave port in the world, and it is still rightly sensitive about that issue. And the blockade runners, again, are still a sensitive topic. Now, going back to the wreck, well, it has been protected by the government under law, and that is partly a reflection of the fact that it is still threatened on the seabed. It's inevitably subject to the process of corrosion and will eventually disappear because of that. But there are other things that are having an impact upon it. And this is a picture, you'll recall, of the paddle wheel, the surviving paddle wheel. Now you have to take it from me that beneath all this marine growth is a trawl net wrapped around the paddle wheel. And trawling, and I've got nothing against fishermen, but trawling still remains a threat to our underwater heritage. And in the case of Lelia, it's clearly been having an impact. In the case of the Iona 2, it may well have done more damage than you can see here. Again, that's another image of the trawl net, again covered in marine growth. You get a bad thing, but it also, underwater, it often becomes a good thing. It's become a habitat. but it'd be better if it wasn't there at all. But there are sort of more unexpected threats. And you'll see here, this is looking down the length of the ship, and you'll see the hull, line of the hull there, and line of the hull there. Notice this thing here, and the fact that the paddle wheel is missing here. And just here is this. And we think this may be part of the paddle wheel. That's the reason for that. You can clearly see that this is actually a dent in the hull where it's been stoved in by some considerable force. And you'll see the engine over here is missing. And you also see that this boiler here has been ripped apart, and possibly this winch has been displaced. Now, the Lelia is not far away from an anchorage that's traditionally been used by vessels. Now, although I don't think a vessel anchoring there has put its anchor down and dragged it and done the damage, because modern ships and carefully monitored. But in the past, this is an area where ships waiting for the right conditions to enter the Mersey. The Mersey is a tidal port. Have anchored, and I think it is quite possible that a ship has dragged its anchor and pulled its anchor into the Lelia, and in trying to break free has done all of this damage. Now, although it's protected, the Lelia, you can still visit the Lelia if you're a diver, and we have produced one of the results of our work was a simple guide to what a suggested route around the wreck. It's a bit like having a guide you get at a normal heritage attraction where you're invited to go around and see different points, and those numbers refer to different points of interest where you can see different features, and whilst you're on the seabed, learn about different aspects of the history of the wreck. This is sadly not the Lelia, but it is the Iona, one of the other blockade runners. And I like to think that this is perhaps the oldest surviving crewman on board the Iona 2, who has made it his or her home between two of the boilers of that wreck. So I'll leave you with this rather lovely image of a lobster. Thank you.
Thank you for watching our Heritage Talk. Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn, exploring the archaeology of the American Civil War. Thank you also to our speaker, Graham Scott, for such an insightful talk. Make sure you keep an eye out for future Heritage Talks across our social media outlets.